We gotta start working on holidays.
Sorry.
You know?
I do.
Make my life simpler.
I
Well,
do.
what's it? Today's a holiday, isn't it, for some people? Valentine's Day.
I don't think anybody drinks
Not for
Valentine's
days
Day
off
off.
though.
Maybe if you work at Hallmark.
Oh, that reminds me, on the way home.
Who you are. Except for maybe knowing which buildings
Sorry. We're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Welcome to the February 14th Washougal City Council Workshop meeting. Jennifer, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Poston?
Here.
Councilmember Russell?
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker?
Here.
Councilmember Delavar?
Present.
Councilmember McDaniel? Here. Councilmember Greenlee?
here.
And Councilmember Morris?
Sure. Excellent. Just reminders, we get started at 6:30. We will suspend this meeting and break for a special meeting dealing with the RTC board. So that could happen at any time, depending on how far we get through this agenda. We're at that point at the start of the meeting for any public comments. Anyone from the public that would like to speak to the council? Okay, we're moving right along. Agenda bills, Public Works. Trevor.
Yes, first is a interlocal agreement with Clark County in regards to regional recycling services. This actually dates back to 2005 and early 2006. Entered into a 10-year agreement with the county to be able to utilize the Watley pit for decant purposes for stormwater waste. At that point, we split the contract with Camas. The total in aggregate was $69,000, leaving us with 34 and a half. So we've been paying almost $3,500 on that on an annual basis. They'd like to execute that through 2015, which would take care of the requirement with the county at Watley Pit. So that's what you see before you today. We do this on an annual basis, and this extends it, or at least recommends extending it through 2015.
Council questions?
Here I had one that had to do with something to do about we're responsible for. We're responsible, Trevor, for our bay or.
Yeah, we
The
split.
next one, the decant, they're gonna take care of everything, but is it up to us to do anything out there?
No, it's all county staff and or their contractor. In the past, they've used George Schmidt and Sons and others to help maintain the facility. This is really our portion of the infrastructure, the capital investment of building the decant facility.
All we're gonna do is back in and dump, well, we don't take anything out there, do we?
We do. Yeah, ultimately, we take our street sweepings and our backdoor
But on
waste
the
from
first
catch
one?
basins.
The decant is the next agenda bill, but what's on the?
Right, so there's a tip fee for going out for each truck where you tip at this facility. So the first contract before you is for the infrastructure capital investment
Okay.
for building the facility back in 2005.
Oh,
And then the second is the actual tip fee to utilize the facility, Clark County's Watley Pit.
Minor thing, I think there's a typo. Expenditure required 3,450, but in the bottom, in the text, it says 34,500.
Right, so in 2005, we, as our portion of the capital improvement for Camas and Washougal was $69,000. So we were able to stretch that out over 10 years with
Oh,
the
I
county's
see.
approval.
Oh, I see, okay.
So Camas and ourselves split that
Oh,
34,500 in totality, but we've been paying about 3,500 every year with no interest.
Thank you, my mistake.
no, it's a good one.
Yeah.
Not on this one, on the next one, thanks.
Can you just, this actually is for the next one too, but where's that located, Watley Pit?
It's up, I forget the address specifically. It's just north of CPU's main headquarters there, I believe.
Prairie High School, a little bit direct.
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
Or across the street.
okay.
Right on the west side.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I have a question, just about the tipping fee. That word tipping, is it really more of just a straight up fee? It's not like,
Per trip.
It's,
The dumping.
Everyone pays the same thing, or no?
We do for our specific bay for Camas and Washougal. So like during this season, when we're doing catch basin cleaning or main line cleaning, we decant as much as possible before we actually run the truck over to Watley Pit, and we tip. That means you dump off one load. That's $127 and change per tip. So
But they
if
don't
we're- so if we-
weigh, they don't weigh you or anything, they just charge you a flat fee.
Not at this point,
All right.
right? So
We don't
inside.
tip them for that either. really.
That's not that bad, it's a big guy, there you go.
Might be inside there.
So if you
Isn't
don't
tipping
go-
the same as a dumping fee?
Right, so if we don't go over there for 3 or 4 weeks, we're not getting a surcharge on a daily or monthly basis when we're not utilizing the facility. So what we've also got built into our capital improvement plan with the stormwater utility is decant facility design and construct in 13 and 14. This gets us through 2015. So we're continuing to exhaust all options as far as decanted material for stormwater.
Other questions for Trev? Trevor, how, oh, we'll get into the next one. Okay, decant services.
Yeah, so basically this is just piggyback onto the contract with the county. Per load or per dump, which we call a tipping fee, there's a cost associated with that for generating the waste. So typically during the winter months or late summer, fall, when we start doing catch basin cleaning and main line cleaning, we generate a lot more waste and have a trip over per day. In the off season, in the late spring, early summer, dry season, we don't go over there as often. So that's what the tipping fee is related to.
Trevor, how clean are the materials that we're taking over to the decant facility? To Watley?
The materials, how clean are they? They have to go through the treatment process that they have in place as far as drying beds before they can actually mix the mulch. They actually have other carbon material that they mix with it and then have reuse where they have it open to the public to come back in and use it as a mulch.
But for what we're taking to them, how clean is it?
Typically, we do hydrocarbon testing on it before we can even dump. So the material's in decent shape, but being that it's catch basin waste, there is oils and hydraulics and other metals that are out there on the street that make their way into the catch basin.
But those are still in that, or they're not in it?
We have to confirm that they're not at the levels that don't meet their standards.
I did have a chance to have a discussion with, a very brief discussion with Waste Connections, and they had noted that they have a favorable rate, but I have no idea what that is. And the discussion was just the end of this last week, in regards to clean material. So,
Right.
I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, there is a market for that, for sure.
Questions? Rod?
Very briefly, I want to go back to the first one, and it says interlocal agreement between Clark County and the City of Washougal for regional recycling. Does that have anything to do with the recycling at our curb?
No.
Okay.
No.
That's a whole other topic in itself. But when it said regional recycling, I just wanted to make sure we weren't addressing anything about the recycling from the curb itself.
Regional stormwater decant material recycling services, is what you should say.
The second question I had, Trevor, was the third paragraph down the cover sheet says the county will submit a monthly bill outlining the number of trips per day and the cost per trip to the city. So we've already identified that the tipping fee is $127.93 per trip. Does Jennifer receive a bill at the end of the month or somewhere along the way? Says you guys had 19 trips this month, and is that how we'll pay that bill?
No, they actually route it to Will Noonan, our street storm manager, and then he confirms on how many loads and within which month. But usually the county's pretty tight on invoicing in a timely manner.
But I heard you say earlier, this month we may not have more than a couple of trips out there, but in June or whenever you start your process going through the city,
Right.
cleaning out storm drains, how many trips a day will you generate? Or will it be a trip a day?
Trip a day.
Okay.
Yeah, and on, high volume days, we're able to decant off a lot of the hydro, a lot of the water, and keep the waste in the back truck we may get 2 trips a day, but for the most part, we try to make one haul with a full load.
Now, you've dumped in that far southeast corner of the sewer treatment pond. That's not an issue anymore? You're not doing that? Or is it, what qualifies to go in that corner out there?
What qualifies for that is wastewater material, sanitary sewer into the lagoons, not stormwater material.
Some of these things will start to kind of run together, and that's why I wanted the clarifications.
This agreement, does it lock in the 127.93 feet for 5 years?
Yes, that's flat.
Given the inflation that's coming, big management's on that.
Yeah, and with the 34,500, our cost for the capital improvement over 10 years, there's no interest associated with that either on a year-to-year basis. So ideally, we'd be able to re-up with the county at the end of 2015. Obviously, they want to reserve the capability to have excess capacity given annexation or development or things take off. But come 2015, if there is capacity at this facility, there may be an opportunity to re-up, push back a capital improvement that's within our stormwater CIP. But at this point, they've been willing to work with us, obviously.
Other questions?
Where'd the numbering system come from on the front of these? We don't have an agenda bill, I guess, per se, but I've never seen this numbering system either.
It corresponds to the agenda bill? Or agenda?
I like it.
We tried to play with your packets a little bit this time around and see if we can segregate these out a little bit easier.
And I appreciate it.
There you go. Trevor, Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant.
Yes, amendment with Department of Commerce. The first item on this is just extending the date. It originally identified October 2011, requesting to extend that to the end of the calendar year through December of 11. Also, the original application alluded to or referenced specific contractors, specifically McKinstry, Ascension, and a few others. Commerce has recommended that we remove those from the contract. Also, we've had conversations with Commerce back and forth in regards to in-kind match, salary and benefits for in-house time spent on this project. For the most part, the Assistant Director, Jim Dunn, has been PMing this project managing it, and tracking his time, as well as Finance Department, RJ, Rodney, and Jennifer. So at this point, it looks like the in-kind match is appropriate for our local match, rather than out of pocket, like we originally anticipated. So that was fairly good news. Also, it gives us a little bit more flexibility around the retrofits for the facilities, the T8 and T12 bulbs. We originally identified LED specifically. We anticipate that most of those retrofits will be LED, but given the fixture and the hodgepodge that we have within our different facilities and different type of lamps as well as Battleground and Camas, we want to be able to have the flexibility to do high efficiency as well as LED once MKE, our electrical engineer, is able to do that assessment at all the facilities. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility on that as well. Any questions on that? We've also got CPU has identified 2 specific street lights that they would like to move forward with. Those are, the companies are Leotech and Beta, which both meet CPU spec for doing the street light swap outs.
Trevor, would you tell me one more time why McKinstry is going to be removed as a contractor? Just because of the in-house work you've done?
Right, there's things that were identified originally for McKinstry that we can do in-house as far as the reflectivity and broadcast checks for specific facilities. There's also a portion as far as competitive bid where we wouldn't award specifically to McKinstry and sole source it. Commerce was a little concerned around that as well.
The other thing that I noticed was I was at the fire station the other day, and Myron and John Walker came through, and they were doing a complete assessment on every building, whether they had T8s, T12s, and what type of what's the electrical?
The ballast.
Ballast. So we have a pretty good, now I think from what I understand, they're gonna have a really good idea. They'll know exactly what we have in every building.
Oh, that's good.
So I think, sometimes even those things that, those ballasts get old and start to go away, there's all record of that, so it's probably got some good evidence that way by going through and doing that evaluation.
Yeah, it's really been a learning process with Commerce as the middleman on behalf of Department of Energy with the block grant. Our original submittal under previous administration was, all lights being the same, being LED, a specific manufacturer and a specific contractor associated with this project. We found, through this process with Jim PMing and the assistance of finance that it's getting fairly tight. We're feeling a lot more comfortable with it, so.
Does this free up $40,000 to go back to the budget? Terrific, I got an idea where you can spend it. Put it aside for East Street restriping. I had to forbear on that one during the budget discussions because the money wasn't there.
Right.
The good Lord provides.
Other questions for Trevor on this one? It's just gonna be a tough act to follow. Trevor said,
Yeah.
good news, good news, good news.
Just one other item real quick. Staff has been, sorry to cut in, Mitch. We've been working on the Phase 2 conceptual design. There's been a few inquiries since the amendment to the Metropolitan Plan in regards to SR 14. Highway roundabouts, those being amended out. What's the next plan? What's the next phase? Where do we go from here for SR 14 Phase 2 or Phase 2B, depending on where the West Slough Bridge is in regards to Phase 1. So we're continuing to track that. I have had conversations with the Port Executive Director as well, Dave Ripp. Ultimately, the commission would make decision on a potential joint sharing or cost sharing for this venture, but we are looking at potentially RFPing that and seeing what type of conceptual design would rise to the top or float to the top. So we are continuing to chase that for options. And that would include River Road, 27th Street, and 32nd, specific analysis at all three of those intersections. So we'll be bringing that to a workshop in the near future once we're able to tighten up exactly where the port is at and bringing that to you, or back to you.
Yeah, speaking of East Street, I was wondering, Trevor, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of an update about the south side. South side sidewalks. I think you were telling me a little bit about, was it you or was it Jim, talking about having to totally completely redo versus spot, putting in the, spot sections?
Yeah, we had a good conversation with TIB, Transportation Improvement Board, lion's share of the support on the East Street project from the, I guess, gas tax dollars, if you will. There's a few items that staff have looked at as far as resurfacing along the corridor, as well as sidewalk enhancement, and a few other pieces that we wanted to vet with TIB to see where they were at. When the contract was awarded, there was a large sum that was pulled from the project based on where the bids came in at from what we originally anticipated with engineer estimate. So we're working through that. We should have an update within the next couple weeks. So we're tracking that. We're tracking, staying with it. Contractor is actually ahead of schedule on East Street.
Yes, that was another good thing.
As it starts dumping rain today.
Yeah.
But
We always hear so much negative about East Street from different ones that it seems to have impacted, but I've heard from a couple of friends of mine that are through there. They're excited about the creativity in the sidewalks and the way it's starting to develop. So I'm pleased with that there's actually somebody out there that thinks this is is looking good and gonna be a good project, so. I drive it every day. If I'm out, I make sure I drive through it, so I'm inconvenienced just like everybody else is driving through there, so.
And I would like to say on East Street, I know it's challenging, especially at dark, to navigate sometimes those cones, but during the daytime, there's always been quite a few flaggers and people with the caution stop signs, so I know that's the, ultimate concern. And for me especially, because you see a lot of, today, there were guys, workers out in the middle of the street. They'd have to kind of walk back and forth. So not only for us to try to ease our mobility and make it a little faster, but safety for those guys. So I think West Tech or whoever the flagger is has done a pretty good job. Because there's a number of spots. I mean, it's always,
Yeah.
it's stretched throughout the entire corridor.
It's moving.
I haven't had, I'm not aware of anything that the fire department has ran on out there as far as anything that a rear end or anybody being hurt. So far, West Tech and the rest of them are doing a really good job of keeping it safe and trying to make it flow.
Any other questions for Trevor?
Just, Mayor, just one add-on comment to the Phase 2 Highway 14 thing. I think the punchline out of all of that is that we don't currently have in our budget adequate appropriation for engineering services to do any preliminary design work. So when we bring it back, we'll try to have tightened down what our share would be in partnership with the port and suggestion for supplemental appropriation.
Okay. Troy, get out of here. Mitch, public hearing, sign regulations.
Yeah, just a reminder that next Tuesday, the 22nd, we'll have a hearing on the sign regulations. The packets that you have here, the additional information, but if you can bring that packet along with the earlier packet that was sent, hopefully save on printing for finance department and printing those up and getting those out, that'd be great. We did talk about, we'll probably have a link on the website too, so parties of record, anybody can get a copy from the website. So this is only a portion of it. So next Tuesday, 22nd.
Okay.
Yes. Mitch, on the fifth page, sixth page back, there's a enforcement of sign violations is equally administered as the top of the page. And it talks about grandfathered rights. Would you, in other words, a business that's already got a sign that they followed all of it, can you talk about a little bit about the discussion that they had with all the existing business owners and grandfathered rights in it?
Well, I mean, it was a general discussion at Planning Commission, but the concept behind it is that if you have a sign that predates the ordinance that goes into effect, you're grandfathered in that sign, whether it doesn't comply with today's standards, you're still okay. You're considered non-conforming. That sign can remain. It can undergo copy change. You can change the letters on it. It just can't get any more non-conforming.
So if the sign comes down, then they have to comply to the.
Then they have to comply with the new standards, yes.
One key piece to that is the concept of non-conforming rights, is that the sign was placed illegally when it was placed.
Exactly.
If the sign is under the radar from day one, it doesn't enjoy any non-conforming rights.
It's a good point.
Okay, so next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday.
Dave, I'm sorry.
Real quick question on that. I noted in here that one of the local businessmen complained about losing business from Washougal to Camas. Do you have any feel for that? Is that a valid complaint or?
No, and actually, Director Boyce at the time actually tried to contact the one business that was named and never got a response back from that business about why they did that or not, so.
Sounds like you've got plenty of evidence from all over the United States for signs and that type of thing, so that's.
And just as an aside, I know Carol Keljo, who's the owner of Security Signs, she spoke with me at Rotary, and she said she'd reviewed all the sign codes and she was pretty happy with it. And so I've asked her to write an email since she would have trouble. She also works on the Northwest, as a member of the Northwest Sign Council. She said she's worked with the City of Vancouver on their sign code as well as a number of other cities. So that's her business is. And Security Signs is a huge business in Portland. They do a lot of huge signage, so that's her business in life. I know there are some issues in here that still need maybe a little bit of work. Just a public hearing.
So at this point in time, it doesn't look like a public hearing, we'll take the input. But there are some aspects of this is gonna go back, is that
Right.
correct?
That is the recommendation from the Planning Commission. That's part of reflectively what we'll recommend to the City Council is that to follow Planning Commission's recommendation with the exception of the off-site sign language that was put in there, but having that, again, the planning commission's request was to have that language come back to them so they can look at that again. There's probably be some other discussion too about language related to the freeway signs instead of the flat 50 feet. I think I mentioned that the last time that at the work session that we had, that we may be looking at something else given the proximity to Highway 14 and how high it is in relation to your property. So there may be some language related to that as well.
Now, I think the last time we had this discussion too, though, there was some discussion also about the fee. Their recommendation versus what we thought was reasonable.
Council adopted the fee last week, yes.
Oh,
on the temporary signs.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so our anticipation is that on Tuesday, we will still hold the public hearing, take any testimony from the public that there is, but not necessarily take any action with it at that point, so.
Although we were thinking that we might have a recommendation for action, if the council's comfortable with it, to do everything the planning commission has suggested, with the exception of these two items.
Being
We think
returned.
that we'll have it baked enough to suggest that to the council, and certainly, depending upon what you hear in your own review, you may want to have more deliberation than that would afford. Then we can bring it back for another work session or whatever is the council's pleasure at that time.
Okay. Other questions? Impact fees.
Okay, for discussion item, kind of starting, it's my understanding that Mr. Neal with Jamie's Daycare came in and had some concerns with the impact fees, and to facilitate this discussion, I guess, kind of starting with the general relating to impact fees and get to the specifics of that case. I'll start with our code. Our city code states that the city shall collect impact fees from any applicant seeking residential, commercial, or industrial development approval from the city for any development activity within the city. That's what the code says. Our code also includes exemptions, and some of those exemptions relate to senior housing or low-income housing, but not for daycare. And if a daycare was an exemption, we would basically have to do that impact fee calculation, and then that fee would have to be paid out of public funds, out of the general fund. So TIF fees are calculated at the time of site plan review for commercial developments. They do run with the land, and I reviewed the tape and I saw that Councilor McDaniels asked the question about other jurisdictions. I did contact other jurisdictions, all the other jurisdictions within the county, and they all follow the same practice of having the TIF fees run with the property and site. There was one kind of, La Center was less emphatic about it. They said they may discuss it, but there's some parameters around that. So that's kind of in general TIFs. Run with the land, calculated time of impact fee, or at the time of site plan review.
And we're not doing anything different for the most part than any other jurisdiction?
No, we're not doing anything different than any other municipality within Clark County, including Clark County itself. The specifics of this case, when the residence was converted to a daycare, there were no impact fees paid, no transportation impact fees paid at all. The fee that Mr. Neal quoted, although I think he said 75, it wasn't quoted that high even with the calculation, but our code does allow for us to look at a reduction or possibly even elimination of impact fees, but it's based on studies, case specific, very specific to the site. Given that information, Director Boyes actually went back and did a calculation. She utilized a transportation study that was done for a Vancouver daycare, and that utilized a percentage reduction for bus trips. And so she utilized those numbers to apply to this use, or the new use, actually what it would be at 2020 E Street. And the impact fee came out to just over $16,000. So that's a pretty considerable reduction when you're looking at impact fees. And that's all within our code. Now, it is, I believe, for City Council to kind of have the discussion. I think it is a legitimate policy question for you to consider the waivers and exemptions and things of that such. But under the city code, city council does not have the ability to waive impact fees.
And the reason that that property at its current site did not pay impact fees when it first developed was?
Honestly, if I had to answer it, I would say it was an error. They made at the time, the director made a determination that all the trips were passed by, and that there were no trips basically being generated at all.
There was no traffic study
Yes.
to justify or rationalize that, so there should have been impact fees assessed and none were assessed. However, that's honored and we can't go back on that, so
No.
they're vested at the site for impact and trips for that use at that site.
But to this point, no impact fees have been paid, traffic impact fees have been paid for the operation that's there currently.
Ever, right. And we're not asking for them to pay it.
Right. I think one of the other questions, not so much a question, but rather the scenario that came up from Mr. Neal last week was questions around the turnarounds, the two entrances, the amount of land that's been taken, that type of stuff. It's still my understanding that any property that's been used for sidewalks, the plantings, any of that is still within our setback on that portion of E Street, correct?
It's all right away.
All within our.
There's still quite a bit of right of way left, that's not being improved by our project. So part of the circulation, so-called circulation that's out there, basically there's two driveways. Before the project, there's two driveways and a gravel front yard. And on the site plan, it shows a U. There's supposed to be some landscaping and the like that was done, that wasn't done. But yes, all the improvements are well within the right of way.
John?
So the language that's written on impact fees and how we deduct them, we have to take them out of general funds, so forth, so on. That's all city code, that's not RCW, correct?
Well, I'm remembering something now that after Mitch just mentioned something. I'd have to go back and check and get legal to give me a confirmation of this, but just remembering from my past position that the reason that communities in Washington have exemptions in their code for senior and low-income housing is because those are categories that can be the recipient of a gift of public funds. And because they are eligible to receive a gift of public funds, when you have a fee scheme that's been established, you can exempt them outright just by their very nature, without any other premise, and then but then supplant that with, or reimburse that, if you would, with your general funds, because what that exemption is doing is it's keeping the transportation capital fund whole. It is, the impacts still exist. They're still being recognized and the system is still legitimate, but they're being paid for by the public. Conversations around, outside of that context, around trying to have different impact fees apply in different locales, in different areas, because you're trying to encourage economic development in a certain area, very broad questions. It is a legitimate topic of conversation. I think it's beyond the scope of this specific case.
Well, I think it is, but it isn't. I think when you look at this, I think we're looking at a bigger question, because Jamie's Daycare is not the only business that may need to be in the process of doing something to better their business due to the work we're doing on E Street. So what I'm saying is that there's any way, and I mentioned this to Joanne, she was gonna look into it, I don't know if she got back to us though, is creating possibly a zone up and down E Street to where we give exemptions on remodels or exemptions on not for new builds, but at least for improvements to existing property. You know, and then that way you're at least getting some kind of incentive for our businesses that are on E Street to do what we've been talking about, upgrading their property and making it nicer and making it more welcoming for customers. I want to go down with you real quick down that road of the exemptions for the poor and for the seniors. Could we make a case that Jamie's Daycare does provide service to the poor if they're able to show us that their, you know, their clientele services, you know, a certain amount of the poor in our community? From what I was gathering from what he was sharing with us was that his daycare sees an exceptional amount of people who are low income.
It's possible.
And so, I mean, I don't know, just, you know, again, trying to figure out ways that we can make this happen, and I know that anything we do need to make it acceptable for all the other businesses along the way. We can't just make one exception just for one business.
Right. I think
It's gotta be equitable.
Right,
So,
I think that's the main point that staff's trying to make, is that notions about impact fees, traffic impact fees are the single locally controlled transportation funding mechanism that you have.
And one of the only ones that we have.
It is the only locally controlled, completely locally controlled transportation funding mechanism that you have, other than just your general fund dollars that you would apply toward transportation improvements. So I think it's important to very carefully consider how you would deal with those. But I think it is definitely a very legitimate and potentially timely topic to explore a variety of incentives for economic development, defining what you mean by economic development and where you mean it, and then looking at what the various tools would be, including impact fees or other fees. To me, that's kind of a broader question than this particular case. If you were interested as a council in expanding the domain of potential uses that could qualify for the gift of public funds exemption, in furtherance of your notion that it needs to kind of apply, it's very easy to talk about it being for senior housing or for low-income housing, because there's that direct nexus is immediately evident. But they have some hoops they have to go through. They have
Yes.
to demonstrate it. I think they have to lock the property into those uses. They have to sign and record some documents.
It's also a
pretty-
now, yeah.
It's pretty tight, you know, they can't convert the senior housing to for sale condos the year after they get our permits. They have to be locked in for a while in order to be eligible, I believe.
Yes.
That's how it works in most communities. I haven't read our code specifically. If you were interested in expanding it to other uses to get the gift of public funds exemption, if you would, we could come up with some similar type of mechanism where we could verify that they qualified under that constitutional exemption, and some similar way to lock them into that. And then we'd have to identify general funds to pay the fee on their behalf.
To reimburse no matter what.
Mhm.
Right, and that's one path. The other path would be to pick a corridor or a region or a component of a comprehensive plan, like our downtown or whatever it would be. Or that's sometimes it's a geographic based one. Also, you can go based on what you want. Doesn't matter where it is, but what it is, and you incentivize those whats by doing different things.
The goal of what the incentive would be.
The goal of the incentive would be if somebody is trying to decide between location A and location B, and location B is in Washougal, and location A is somewhere else, and we're a little cheaper for them and a little better, maybe an impact fee waiver is what would get them over the hump. Usually that'll only be the case when you're talking about significant TIFs, is what I found.
I would think that we would want to be looking more in the areas of reductions or temporary eliminations of the transportation impact fees along that corridor itself, given the massive amount of work that's being done. I don't think we want to take, in this specific instance, we don't want to take a specific business and build something around it. If we truly want to see redevelopment and development of that area, then I think we need to look broader. Now, that may not help Larry though either. I mean, if we're saying that it's not necessarily for that property, but it's, you know, maybe it doesn't impact new construction. Down here, he's gonna be new construction. It's gonna impact him.
Now, there is no way that he can stay in that building?
I don't know that.
I don't know that.
It's functioning today.
He's alleging that the elimination for traffic safety reasons of one of the driveways and the encroachment into our own right-of-way of 13 feet with our improvements is compromising his ability to function with what he's got going on in the front. If we were looking at an aerial of the site, and I don't want to assert this with any level of confidence other than I looked at an aerial of the site, so I could be completely wrong. I'm going to say that right up front, but it appears that, and I don't know when that photo was taken, it appears that with certain site improvements on the property itself, that there might be some rearranging that could be done to accommodate what's necessary, but it certainly would be at cost, you know, it would require him to do things.
Well, let me throw this in there too, and just, you may hear this around town, but one of the things that's been brought to my attention, well, you guys did this for Mr. Janser on the corner in the pet shop, and you guys paid to have them moved. And so, understand that while it's not really the same thing in the public's eye, in some realms, people are looking at that and saying, oh, you guys did it for this business, why don't you do it for ours? So that is around town.
We don't want to purchase his house.
Huh?
Yep.
A couple of weeks ago, I was on a volunteer project. We were doing plantings over at Kerr Park. And there were several residents that really wanted to bend my ear along the lines of, we don't want to have to pick up the tab for new development. If a new developer comes in, whether it's new houses or new businesses or whatever, we shouldn't have to pay for that. And I launched into my explanation of what impact fees are and what they're supposed to do. And so I would encourage us to listen to those concerns about the residents, because in a lot of ways, anything that we give to Jamie's Daycare comes out of someone else's pocket, especially our residents' pockets.
Potentially.
This is a new area for me, but something you said attracted my attention. You talked about a $16,000 impact fee versus or the possibility of it versus what, 70,000?
63.
63, Mr. Neal was talking about. The East Street project, as I understand it, and I'm not sure you would argue with this, even though you talked about that aerial view there, the East Street project imposed a situation on Jamie's Daycare which made the property not usable. You said it's possible to improve it. I don't know what cost. Do you have any idea?
I have no idea. Just this afternoon, we looked at the site plan.
Okay, so, and I wouldn't ask you to estimate off the cuff. So my question is it an issue of fairness for us to work with him to mitigate the impact that our project had on his business, not just his property, but his business?
I would assert that since he went into operation, that he's been having the benefit of the city's right of way for his own private circulation.
You mentioned that, yeah.
And that our utilization of about not even half of the right of way that exists there now for our own project doesn't impose upon the community an obligation around that notion of fairness, but I certainly understand the perception around that, because when you're out there and you look at it, it doesn't look like it's the city's right of way, and up and down those properties, everybody's using it. It's the classic scenario, and sometimes it surprises folks to find out, oh, my front yard's not my front yard. I thought it was my front yard, but it's
Or
not
my backyard.
or my backyard, or whatever. So I would hesitate to say that in the broad sense that using our right-of-way for our own public purposes for the community puts us in a situation of having to reimburse or otherwise compensate for impacts. On the other hand, if we were needing to take or to use private property to further the public interest, we can't do that. Our federal constitution, as you know, would preclude that. And we have to make sure that we pay a fair price for that. And sometimes that results in, unfortunate conflicts between a community and its private citizens.
Thank you for expanding my consciousness on this.
Rod?
First of all, John, I wanted to thank you, because I wasn't here last week, but Larry doesn't come in here trying to work with us very well. I mean, he comes in on the attack 99% of the time. So I have a problem with that here we are trying to resolve his problems, and I don't feel like we've ever had him come to this podium to work with us. It's an attack. Thanks for being calm and trying to straighten him out last week. That was good that you tried to point out those things to him. The problem I'm having, though, is like Paul. How do we, if we have a capital facilities plan that's counting on those dollars from those impact fees, how in the heck do we give them a break and then expect a business in another portion of the town or the citizens who are, or a builder of a home to pay those extra dollars that he got waived? There's just got to be some other way to, and no one has said, and I mean, it's his assumption, he can say anything he wants to us, that his business is no longer functioning, but that's based on whose desire. So I don't know, this is what it takes to move forward, and he needs to pay his fees.
Well, I think, as Dave said, it's a broader discussion of, you know, what potentially we do out there, whether it's along East Street or whether it's through some other corridors in the community. We would have to run numbers, but certainly the offset to it is if we're doing a diminished or for some time certain a waiver of those impact fees along that area in order to get it to develop and or redevelop, the upside is the additional property taxes, retail taxes, everything that we would get long-term versus the short-term on there, plus the magnification of the fact that we've just dropped $6 million into that roadway. The biggest effect that they're going to have on the transportation system has just been rebuilt in front of them. So there are some areas in there it's still not going to feel good. It won't feel good to Mr. Hickey or some other folks along here if we're turning around doing that at the same time. So
If we work some way to compensate Jamie's daycare, then what do we do when Highway Fuel comes by and says, well, you impacted my business because you took out 4 egress, ingress approaches? I mean, they've all had that concern. And I know that, you know, for years they worked on trying to get everybody to figure out how we were going to put these ramps, if you will, into pieces of that along East Street.
Right.
And every business was impacted in some form by that. So.
and I'm not completely certain that when we get done with East Street, you know, a year from today, we're still going to have it correct. I think we'll have cleaned up a lot of what was existing and what's been historical out there for safety purposes. But we also may legitimately come back and say, yeah, you do need another curb cut in there. Because we're going to force a different pattern of traffic along that corridor.
Would that be the simplest solution right now?
That's what
Would
I
be to
was
put
gonna
another route for him, and then would he go away? Would he be happy?
You're asking a question that none of us could answer.
I don't know. I thought what I heard was that it's the combination of the access and the encroachment that's compromised the use of that front area. But before we talk about introducing additional access on a major arterial, it really is a traffic engineering question according to the traffic engineering standards, and we have to really analyze that. Yeah.
Molly?
No, you actually, the question has been asked or posed about doing another curb cut there and how much that would impact his need to move or his perceived need to move. But I do appreciate you bringing this topic forward because I think it's one that bears a lot of discussion. So we really do need to talk about traffic impact fees in general and a funding source for our local transportation projects, needing to keep that bucket at a certain level, and the E Street project in specific, and maybe some ways that we can spur or incite economic development along that corridor.
I think if Trevor was here, he'd chime in and, you know, that the survey for our capital facility plan, transportation capital facility plan is out there now. You know, we're working through that. There'll be an impact fee discussion as part of that project as well, so.
It's timely.
Mhm.
Paul?
Real quick, refresh my memory, does he own this or does he
No,
lease it?
he leases it.
So he's not the property owner here?
No. Jennifer?
Yes. I thank you very much for bringing this topic forward and for bringing forward also the research on the other cities and what they're doing. That was my question that I had at the last meeting. Where is he moving? Do you know, or talking about moving?
He's looking at.
You mentioned a spot.
The 2020 E Street, which is the old Susan Stoffer Law Office. It was a residence just not that long ago. It's on blue, right on the corner of 20th, and just right down when you go across
Okay,
the railroad.
all right. Now, you were saying that TIFs follow the property, is
Correct.
that correct?
Mhm.
Do you happen to know about the developers of that property, they've already paid did they pay their TIFs when they built?
On this site?
On the site he wants to move?
Well, what they paid at that time, I'm assuming that what they paid for was a single-family residence, that's what it was. Although they did a conversion at some point to a law office. And what we did, we would give them a credit for that use there. So I did a calculation, it's just over $3,000 that they get an impact fee credit for an existing law office. So that would be then subtracted from whatever their impact fee calculated would be.
Okay, so there's.
They didn't pay,
They didn't pay any?
They didn't pay they paid at the time probably a couple of grand for a residence.
Oh, I see.
However, similar to what we're doing down the street with Ms. Chamey, we're not, you know, he had a business there. If someone came in and wanted to, he moves out, someone comes in and wants to put a daycare back in there, I'm not going to charge them an impact fee because it's basically grandfathered,
Same use.
yes.
I don't know how old the home is and now the law office at 2020,
East Street
yeah, probably predates our TIF.
probably predates.
Probably there's never been a TIF fee paid there. However, that's true for any building that exists or use of land that exists prior to the inaction of TIF fees. So they are credited fees for the use that exists.
I mean, I can kind of see his point, and that the building that he's wanting to relocate to was already converted to a business. So there
Sure.
was a traffic impact of some sort, you know, for this particular business.
But you still gotta pay the
while
difference
it
of that.
was
And that's a credit of 3,000.
So 3,000 is.
Would come off
what
to
you're talking
16.
about.
It would come off to
The
16.
16.
Yeah, the daycare is a more trip-intensive use. than
Sure.
law.
It's really, yeah, it's more for certain times of the day though, mornings and evenings, not necessarily in the middle of the day.
Right.
Not necessarily.
Which doesn't help them.
No, we go by average daily trips. yeah,
Oh, average
weekday.
daily trips.
Yeah.
Average daily trips.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I am not sure if the Joanne's calculation already took into account the credit. So if it already took into account the credit, it may not be another 3,000 off that 16, it may already include that credit, but I'd have to check on that.
Thank you.
John?
I was just gonna thank Paul for bringing up that. I had just assumed that he was the owner of that property. And so I'm gonna just take some more time to reevaluate that, because that changes a lot of dynamics for me personally, versus if, you know, if he's just renting the building. Where's the landlord? Why isn't he complaining? Where's he at in this? I mean, so.
We haven't asked the property owner whether or not they would be supportive of a TIF regime that
Yeah.
takes trips with the use instead of leaving it with the land. I would assume the property owner wants to retain the credit for those trips to the property.
Yeah.
That would be.
So, I moved away a little bit from where I was.
Paul?
I just had one it's more a general question. Tip fees are based on average daily trips. And so there's, roughly speaking, a hierarchy of businesses that generate lots of trips and businesses that generate very few trips. What's kind of at the top of the list in terms of generating trips?
No.
Drive-through restaurants.
Yeah.
Fast food.
Maybe gas
Stations,
stations,
yeah.
yeah, which is kind of a drive-through type business. Retail, retail sometimes pays a lot.
So Weimar, big number,
Bigger number.
bigger number,
Yeah.
but not.
A house is 1080, average daily trips, 10 ADTs is the tip, that's what a house gets. And it's in the, what we call the transportation Bible, it's the ITE. And it's all tabulated. I would say it's rare that anyone pays fees off of that manual. They usually do a study because the manual is very conservative and usually costs you more.
And so something like an accountant or a tax prep or an estate attorney is going to generate only a few trips.
Right.
Relative. And then there's concurrency, which has to do with whether your intersections are failing or your corridors are failing. And that uses PM peak trips, which is another animal.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note too, because with the moving to 2020, that he does have to have a traffic study done, because his estimated PM peak hour trips are 45 to 50, which is well over our threshold for concurrency. So it'll have to do, and at the time, the pre-app noted at least that intersection of 20th and East Street. It pretty much punted on Washougal River Road because we were doing the improvement, so we felt that that was all right. The other thing I wanted to note too, that he could have an independent study done, I think you alluded to that a little bit, that could show that his trips were considerably less than anything that we've even looked at. And that's documented in the record, we can go by that. It was 100 trips at $229 a trip, worth $1,000. So that option is still available to him to go out and do an independent calculation for a trip.
As long as it's valid and verifiable.
Traffic engineer licenses within the state of Washington.
And what we've done and what Joanne did essentially to lower this number is it's a little unusual. There was but Vancouver did it too.
Yep.
There was a daycare in Kelso. The traffic engineer did a study for that daycare in Kelso, and they used it in Vancouver for a daycare in Vancouver. I don't know if the traffic engineer who did the study in Kelso knows that is now being cited in Vancouver and now informally here in Washougal as well. That's a whole other topic, but I would say, just in my own experience and years of dealing with these things, that Washougal has really, really expended a lot of effort at the staff level to try to do everything that it can, given the circumstances, and trying to help out the situation. It's really, I think, gone the extra mile and gotten us down pretty far without the applicant having to really do anything in terms of getting a traffic engineer.
Other questions for Mitch? Certainly, this is one that resurfaces every once in a while. Don't hesitate to ask Mitch or Joanne when she's back any questions that you may have on the property, the history, where we're at in the process now, what the latest version of what the business may be looking to do. I know the file on this individual business continues to get a little thicker, so we've got a lot of data back there. I just want to make sure that as you go through things, you certainly have the benefit of all of the information that's there that we've been able to gather here today, so. Mitch, thank you. Get out of here, go home and get healthy.
Just got a cough.